réunion, dis-je, numéro 113 du comité
I call
permanent.
this meeting, number 113 of the Standing Committee on Official Languages, to order. I want, in order to avoid any type of acoustic shock accident, I would like to invite everybody who is here in person to read the guidelines that you find on the table ahead of you that deals with the Larsen effect in terms of accidents. I wait, please, until I recognize you by name to give you the floor, and all your comments should be directed to the chair. I would ask the members to raise their hand if they wish to speak on Zoom, and the clerk will do everything to maintain a speaking list and be watching to see that you get your turn. So, for the people who are here with us in the room, this is what we do. Pursuant to Standing Order 108.3F, according to the reference of 29 April 2024, we are continuing our study of minority language education continuum, and we are going to break the ice of this very ambitious study that we are undertaking. We have from the Association des Conseils Scolaires des Écoles Publiques de l'Ontario, Mr. Labelle and Madame Gérard on video conference. And also from the Commission Nationale des Parents Francophones, we have Ms. Anderson and Mr. Racine here in the room. So if you lack time, although you have 5 minutes to make your presentation, and I'm sure I'll be scolded by the analyst and the clerk if you go over time. But if you want to make any other comments, you can also always put them in writing and submit them to us. So first of all, I will give the floor to Mr. Labelle and Madame Gérard to speak to us for the next 5 minutes. We don't hear you, unfortunately, Mr. Labelle. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry I closed. Please go ahead. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting the Association des Conseils des Écoles Publiques de l'Ontario, which I'm president of. I'm accompanied by my executive director, Madame Girard. We encompass 153 schools with over 35,000 students who achieve the best academic results in Ontario's 4 school systems. Our schools aim to build a plural Francophone culture that not only celebrates diverse backgrounds and experiences, but which also creates a shared sense of belonging. However, to achieve this, we must remember that the Supreme Court justices have unanimously concluded that students whose access to French language education is guaranteed under Section 23 of the Charter are entitled to facilities, quote, equivalent, unquote, to those of the majority, which is often far from the case. According to this principle, Francophones have the right to a school that is well adapted to their needs. However, the chronic underfunding of French language school boards hinders access to French language education for rights holders and French-speaking newcomers, as well as hindering the development and consolidation of existing French language schools. There are many difficulties. Minority schools face demographic pressures and geographic constraints, as well as limited resources. They must reconcile the reality of a predominantly English-speaking area with the realities of the French language. This dual mandate cannot be fulfilled without adequate financial support. Thanks to the program that exists, the official language program that specifies education plays a vital role in a context where the majority of French language boards are underfunded due to provincial per student funding formulas. Federal funding is a lifeline for us and for many school boards and schools, enabling them to offer enriched services and programs that ensure not only the learning in French, but also the development of their students. That is very important. However, this support must go well beyond the status quo, just maintaining the status quo. It is imperative that we commit to strengthening and enhancing this funding to ensure every child in that situation has the opportunity to learn in French. Moreover, funding must not only take into account the rapid growth of the French language system, but also the need to ensure that every child in a minority setting has access to an education of the highest quality without compromise. It is essential, therefore, that the federal government impose a genuine process with respect to the French language school boards so that funding can be spread well across the country. Another crucial aspect of funding to alleviate teacher shortage is to alleviate teacher shortages. This funding needs to be substantially increased and must be less dependent on centralized control by the provinces in order to provide school boards with the flexibility they need to attract and retain qualified teachers in their communities. Now, I would go as far as to say, in conclusion, that it is important to maintain the survival of la francophonie in our beautiful country. That is what is at stake. I would be remiss if I didn't stress the fundamental importance of adequate federal funding to ensure a full continuum of service. Our elementary schools rely on early childhood education, while the sustainability of our high schools depends on access to quality post-secondary education. These components are all essential for promoting the vitality and survival of the French-speaking communities in Canada. Without financial support of the federal government, our efforts to ensure French language education in Canada would be jeopardized. From early childhood education to end high school, we have a great deal of work that remains to be done in preserving the French language, but we have hope for the future. Thank you. You still have 5 seconds. That's wonderful. Now, for the Commission Nationale des Parents Francophones, Madame Anderson, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I'm Gillian Anderson, and I'm a proud Francophone parent from the St. Albert, Alberta area. I'm also a president of our commission. I would like to thank you for inviting us to testify as part of the study, of your study on the continuum of minority language education. While we work with all parents across the education continuum, we have worked extensively on early childhood issues over the past few decades. We are here today to speak on behalf of the parents of 141,000 children aged 0 to 4 who, according to the latest census, are entitled to French language education under the Charter of Rights. Daycare spaces are an issue. French language ones are an issue. They are very difficult to obtain, and it is a heartbreaking decision that is made by some parents to have to put them in English language early childhood education. We, fearing that their children won't be able to adapt to a French-speaking school later on in their education, and to ensure their future, we have many testimonials from parents who are often both French-speaking school persons, and they want to preserve that academic ability of being educated in French for the children that they have. Of the 141,635 children entitled to French language education in a minority setting, fewer than 20% manage to place their children in a French language daycare center. This means that 80% of the cases, in 80% of the cases, rather, thousands have been placed elsewhere, not in French language, but in English language daycare. Why? Essentially, the problem largely lies with the agreements that have been made with the provinces, that the provincial and territorial action plans are vague and provide little framework for the use of French in Alberta. For example, we find ourselves in Alberta with only 19 of the 1,500 new daycare places which are allocated to French-speaking children. Early childhood education is really the gateway to French language education. It's clear that the lack of daycare services contribute directly to the lack of French language education. It is therefore crucial to act quickly and to ensure that minority languages in Canada are preserved and qualify in order to preserve our language. We want to see children in minority situations benefit from greater funding. Lastly, I'd like to take a moment, Mr. Chairman, to say a few words about the rest of the education continuum. In doing so, we'd like to support all the speakers who will be appearing before you, who will speak to this issue. We believe very strongly that families and French language education must be supported in Canada. Education in French it leads to very lively debates amongst French language parents as to how to preserve their language and the education system in French. We have to have more substantial support for parents, more substantial funding. We have to support the parents when the time comes to choose French language post-secondary institutions. Information should be there to help them make that choice. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the lack of early childhood education in French and the lack of support for parents for the constitutional right to education in French in a minority situation can constitute a threat to the future of Francophone communities living in a minority situation. Thank you so much for your attention. I perhaps should say Madame Anderson is the president of the Commission Nationale des Parents Francophones, while Mr. Denis Labelle is the president of the Ontario Association, and they are there with their colleagues. 6 minutes for each party with questions and answers. Madame Gladieux is going to break the ice. 6 minutes, Madame Gladieux. Well, so much. Thank you so much for being here. And I do have a question for Mr. Labelle. Can you speak to the need of funding, to the Charter of Rights, to the lack of French language instructors? What else could the federal government do to improve the situation for a French language secondary education? Thank you for your question. One thing that we would like, if there is money for it, would be to be able to increase the number of schools in Northern Ontario if there were money to purchase and to build those schools. We would like to have funding and attract funding, but we do have difficulties at this time. We are training 1,000 teachers per year, but only 500 graduate to move on to teaching positions in Ontario. We do have Laurentian University in Sudbury. We have the University of Ottawa. But there are only 500 who graduate every year, and there is a great need. But nonetheless, when they can't find a position, we have a surplus. We have to have a greater number of Francophone schools in Ontario. Perhaps I could ask Madame Isabelle if she could add to my answer. Yes, thank you so much, Chair. You certainly, Mr. Lebel, you've outlined the situation for us. I also think, though, that these very significant amounts in terms of the lack of teachers would lead us to say that we need more spots in universities, in bilingual universities. Funding is assigned in terms of French language. So the University of Ottawa or Laurentian don't receive the funding that they should, given the number of places that are available. It would be extremely important to have specific funding in education faculties to have spots available for French language education students, for Francophones, and also it would be important to have greater funding and spots in small co-ops because, as Mr. Lebel said, we don't have a lot of people graduating to teach at the secondary school level. This being the case, the teaching corps is restricted, it's small, and that does create a problem. But to have more, we need more funding. Thank you. In my riding, we have the same experience. We have 5 or 6 schools, but 8,000 students. There is a very high demand for spots in those schools, for places, space in that school. My second question is for Ms. Anderson, though. Can you share your experience in interacting with the government in terms of early childhood education? Well, there are provincial territorial agreements to ensure that there is availability for our Francophones. It does change every 4 years, I'd say. There sometimes are more concrete and specific agreements that occur, but that is what we need. What is missing in early childhood education now is structured funding. For 2 years now, early childhood education in a minority situation has received no funding, no government support whatsoever. There are opportunities in BC recently, but beyond that, absolutely no financial support. Yes, there is a program that has been announced, but it's been about 2 years now since from March that there has been any funding announced for Francophone early childhood education programs. Yes, only about a very small percentage can have access, as you have said. What are the weak spots in provinces? In 30 seconds. Yes, there are linguistic clauses in agreements, but it's the action plan of the province in question that will prove a problem. We have the action plan where there's zero attached to it. Only Manitoba has attached a small amount of funding. And I challenge you to look at all the action plans in the provinces to find any specific amount of money, any significant amount of money that would be available for Francophone early childhood education. Madame Gladu, you are aware of the funding. It comes from the provinces. I know you are aware of that, but you are speaking to the difficulties as to what is going to happen. We know that you are experts. And speaking of experts, we have an expert now who is going to ask a question. Mr. Sanson, 6 minutes. Thank you so much, and I thank my colleagues for being here today and our witnesses as well. I don't want to contextualize too much, but I do want to ask a question. C13, you got support for the first time in history. There was no mention of it was historic in that there was not even a mention of early childhood education in Canada. Clause 23 does not contain a reference to a secondary school or post-secondary education. Clause 413, 416 as well. 93, 2, all of that I referenced to you. You have, for the first time, something to refer to, something that you can use in your toolbox. The approach that existed in Canada over the past 50 years moved towards failure. It was impossible. Today we have the power to speak to that issue, and today's government and tomorrow's governments must speak to the issue in a major way. That is what I had to say. Here's my question. How will the addition of $10 hit the $10 for early childhood education? Is that going to help your situation as Francophone persons in Canada? Well, I can say yes, definitely. But there are major obstacles that remain. Access is very difficult. In BC, for example, to access the $10 a day daycare, 70% of the spaces in daycare have to be occupied. So if you lose one educator at 70% enrollment, you are no longer eligible for the $10 plan. I understand. Yes, it's the criteria that are so important. There was an amendment made by the Senate to C-35 because of the work that has been done. And that is thanks to the type of work that you have done. Are you able to say that this change will help you? Well, in terms of a C-35, we have a guarantee of long-term funding for official language minority communities. And that means that funding will continue. Well, that's wonderful. You're finally recognized. You are finally recognized, and you are receiving funding if the next government continues to respect those guarantees.
You said it was relating to the program for official language minority communities. You've never received any money on that? So in BC, parents receive some funding through a program. In Alberta, there is nothing. There's absolutely nothing for parents. So even though it may be the same program at the federal level, it is not made use of in the same way throughout all provinces. Any other provinces other than Manitoba? Because PLOE, or Official Language Educational Program, is not available to all. Well, there is. It depends. It varies a lot. It depends on the provincial government. As our president was saying, in BC, they have money for daycare to support the parents, but in Alberta, it's absolutely nothing. And in some provinces, same. But is that in this particular program? Is it because it depends on the provinces? So actually the provinces are the ones determining these things, usually in consultation with the communities, but very often parents are not consulted. The early childhood sector is not consulted. Listen, I'm glad you have all the answers because this has to be known. Are you actually saying that this money would be in this actual official language education plan? Because if it were available, then the provinces would have to deliver the goods. Then if there wasn't, if this program didn't exist, I think it depends on the clauses, it depends on the action plans, but there's no guarantee that if it the funds are in the program, that will automatically flow, because the provinces and territories have discretion in these areas. If they decide they want to focus on high school, then they'll spend it on high school, and there will be nothing for early child care. So actually, there's no consistency. It's every province does its own thing. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for saying it, and I also want to thank the committee for doing this study, because it's critical. And I hope it will give us an opportunity to make some conclusions about what's happening in these jurisdictions. We really appreciate your attendance here today. Thank you, Mr. Sanson. On time, for once. Next question. It's just a friendly joke. Second Vice Chair, Mr. Rouleau, for the Bloc Québécois. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I have a question, actually, for all witnesses. We've heard that it's the first time Statistics Canada has actually assessed the numbers of rights holders in outside of Quebec. How many people actually have access to these schools by and for francophones? Microphone. My colleagues from the association would have data on this, but I would say it varies a great deal, from 70 to 50%. I think in Alberta, I know that it's below 50%, so it varies a great deal. Now, with early childhood, based on our data, and we hope to gather more soon, according to our data, it's fewer than 20% of parents. 80% of parents have no choice. They have to put their kids in Anglophone daycares. And as we've said, 2 Francophone parents and their child will only speak to them in English. It just takes 2 or 3 years in early childhood. Those are the critical years. Otherwise, all is lost. It's not just the parents. You know, people will find the easiest solution. If it's a massive challenge to find French daycare, you know, it's already hard enough to find daycare spots, whether it's in English or in French. To ask Francophones to then jump through more hoops, it's already too much. And then you've lost them straight off the bat. What about in Ontario? How many rights holders have access to these schools that are designed for Francophones? I can answer this question. In Ontario, we have 278,000 and some right holders, and we have 158,000 spots. So we're actually lacking 110,000 spots. So, microphone, please. If I could add something. I firmly believe, I have a doctorate in health administration. I really understand communities. Daycares are the very root of Francophone survival. This is where we lose people. It's not afterwards. If we connect, connecting these daycares to our school system is the path to educating these right holders in French. Okay, we hear that 20% of rights holders have access to Francophone daycare. Same in Ontario? I could find those figures for you, but daycares are not within our purview, so I think perhaps my colleagues would have a more accurate answer for you. Unfortunately, I don't have specific data for Ontario, but I have more of a pan-Canadian. 2 people were speaking at the same time. Our ability to meet the demand has really reduced. La FISO, which is the organization that is in charge of about 20 daycares throughout Ontario, they have about 55% of available spots. So 45% of spots are not something that they can offer. They have the permits to do so, but then you have centers where it is more difficult because you're talking about remote areas. So to maximize those ratios is very difficult. 55% occupancy rates, if you will. I don't have that specific data, percentages, as you requested. If we were to get the funding, we would be able to get the right data, just comprehensive data, the data that we need, and really so that we can get a clear picture of the situation. But I would say less than 20%. Okay, if you're starting on at 20%, I mean, what does this mean to you? You know, you said earlier that there is no funding from provincial governments. I mean, what's the reason for that? Well, there are some exceptions here and there. I was referring to BC. We received some good news recently, but it's almost as though you're paying for these daycare spots the same way you would for Anglophones. Yeah, they have access to $10 a day daycare, but let's say what we need is, let's say a parent wants to put their kid in an English childcare. There's no spot available, then they go to another Anglophone school. But the opposite is not true. Francophones will then have to turn to an Anglophone daycare. La FCE is responsible for 25 daycares. Only 4 are financially viable because all of the other ones have basically said, we can't deal with this anymore. It's up to you. You know, these are parents that are managing these things. And they say, you take care of this, you take care of managing this. But the problem is, these are in remote areas. They can't really meet that ratio. They're not financially viable, but because there are 4 viable centers, we focus excessively on those 4 centers as though they can support these regions. This is incredible, says the member. And that's the problem, is there's no province other than BC that recognizes the importance of having a shared management of our resources to be effective. Thank you, Mr. Racine. Mr. Julian, welcome to the committee. You have the floor. 6 minutes. It's a pleasure to be here, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you to our witnesses. You referred to the importance of having French language services. We know full well that when it comes to education, daycare, university, if those services are not available, we're basically looking at assimilation. This is the reason why Francophone parents had to fight so hard to get a spot in these networks. Your testimony is important. I'd like to get back to something you said, Mr. Racine, Madame Anderson, or to the issue of daycares. How many bilingual or Francophone daycares are there outside of Quebec? Do you have a figure for that? 750 daycare services, but of course it varies because some shut down, some new ones crop up. Between 700 and 750. We hope to get funding to have more tangible data for you, but it's about that. Outside of Quebec, yes, outside of Quebec. And we really count on Francophone daycare. Sorry, Mr. Julian, I'll stop the clock. When you say we're waiting for funding, we are not in your minds. What were you referring to? Well, the SDC, there's a call for proposal for $47.7 million worth of funding, and that was announced in the action plan in March 23. But since then, we have been waiting, and it's been, almost 2 years now in March of next year. Thank you. Great question, Mr. Chair. So let's say we're dealing with about 750 of these groups. Can you tell us how much money you're getting, or they would be getting from the federal government? Well, the funding comes in from the federal government, goes to the provinces, and right now it's mostly for $10 daycare spots. And yes, we see that there are subsidies, but sometimes it's more challenging. Ontario is a good example because all of the funding goes through municipalities. So you know how many municipalities there are in Ontario. you'd have to take a look at every municipality, how many spaces are there for Francophones, how many $10 a day daycare spots are there for Francophone parents, and then people think that because they have a Francophone family in an English-speaking daycare that it's mission accomplished. Some governments say, listen, we've solved the problem. You've got a space for this child. So they are not actually drawing a distinction between these two things and the importance of having a kid in a French daycare. First and foremost, we favor Francophone, unilingual Francophone daycare spots, because if it's bilingual or if it's Anglophone, it just contributes to assimilation further. Thank you. Mr. Lebel, Madame Girard. When you refer to this gap between the number of children in Francophone schools and the needs versus the spaces, is that due to a lack of staff or lack of funding? That there is this shortfall, this gap between 270,000 and the 150,000 spots, the number of students per spots. Perhaps I can go ahead. I think both these things are factors. When you listen to our colleagues from the early childhood sector and what we experience, the common issue is really a shortage of qualified teachers. And so long as we don't address that, well, we really won't be able to take advantage of what's available, what should be available to us because of this serious shortage. I think we need common solutions for these teachers, childhood educators, mental health services. I think this has to be addressed. So you need to invest significant resources to address that problem, because that has a knock-on effect on everything else that we might want to bring into place through this official language education plan. When it comes to our public school boards, we know that there are areas throughout our province that do not have Francophone public school systems. So those children's parents, have no other choice but to send them to immersion schools. And then it's the reasonable parent test. You know, if I have a neighborhood school or I have to have my kid take the bus for an hour and a half, a reasonable parent really has to make that tough choice. Send their kid to the English language or immersion school. And that's a major challenge. Of course, this is what we fight for daily. So we can get to the root of the problem. We need to focus on these early childhood educators and these teachers. That's the number one thing. And I also think that the federal government has an important part to play in this recognition of, foreign credentials, etc. Thank you. Next question. The first vice chair, Mr. Gaudin, you have the floor. Thank you to our witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for being available here or virtually. The first thing I noticed when I joined this community is that there is really no shortage of client base, that there's actually a lack of bodies that can actually support them. We have these potential students, but we're not taking care of them. The second thing that I note is that the future of French language, the French language in Canada, depends entirely on French parents' absolute focus on making sure that their children can be educated in French. And so if we count on parents' motivation, then that, I think, is a big problem. My colleague, Mr. Sanson, was referring to C-35, and there have been amendments that were brought before the Senate. I'd like to remind you and others, I think it should be said that we, the Conservative Party of Canada, made sure to table amendments so that these component parts that were really critical for the Francophones were included in C-35. I just wanted to put that on the record. Now, clearly, provinces are not necessarily allies. BC seems to be sensitive to this issue, Manitoba as well. But what is the magic pill? What should the federal government do to impose these things while having respect for provincial areas of jurisdiction? Help us help you. You know, we have the same goal in mind. Mr. Racine, Madame Anderson, you can start. I'll start and then defer to my colleague. These are clauses that would be applicable in every province and territory, and to have someone in each of these provinces to make sure that these things are enforced. Okay, but it's a lack of will. I mean, perhaps unknowingly people do not realize the impact. I'm not actually accusing the provinces and territories of this. It seems like a lack of will. It should be in specific provisions in clauses in these agreements with the provinces and territories. Yes, and also in the action plans, provinces need to be clearer. They need to really make sure that everything is quite clear. The federal government needs to say, okay, we do things differently because we represent the minority. In PEI, there were 150 young people waiting for spaces in Charlottetown, and that's Charlottetown alone. One solution would be to have family daycare spots, but the federal government says we can't give you this funding because Anglophones haven't asked for it. If they didn't ask for it, then we can't give it to you either. But that's exactly what we need because Anglophones have multiple options. We don't. We don't have a fallback plan. So you have 150 parents on a wait list, and there's no family-based daycare because the federal government is unwilling to have an association or fund an association of that nature. To our witnesses online, would you have any comments? I'd like to confirm this. We need really specific clauses. Otherwise, I think we'll lose that battle. In Ontario, they'll have consultations. They might invite us. But we actually never see any action plans resulting from all this work. It's sort of, there's some political pressure on them, but we really have no power. We're powerless here. 50 years ago in Ontario, we had to strike. We had to fight to have French schools. But the issue of shortages, the cost of immersion, all of this is managed by Anglophones. Where do you think they get their teachers from? In our pool of teachers, and that's contributing to our shortage in the Francophone system.
Thank you, Mr. Labelle. I have a question, and I turn to the Commission. What is the impact of the actual numbers versus the estimates in terms of funding? That's an excellent question, and I think we'll have to get back to you a little later on that. Mr. Serry, 5 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. We are already envisaging many recommendations. When we look at early childhood education, elementary school, secondary school, something historic has to be done. I really want to continue to enrich our discussion. Madame Labelle, Mr. Girard, the change in 2000, 189,000. That change you believe to be a problem. because when you talk about geography, limited resources, distances, do you have any specific recommendations to make to the provinces as to how to change their parallel basic formula? Thank you, Mr. Serre. I think we have to work together to achieve something. There are two systems. We've got the public system and the private system. And even in terms of transportation, it doesn't make any sense at all that there is a French language Catholic bus carrying students and an English language Catholic school bus carrying students on the same route, using the same roads. We have to work together. That's an example. I don't know what else to say. Okay, can you repeat, your question? The formula for funding. This is what is providing great difficulty to your school boards. Unfortunately, at the present time, we don't have the ear of the persons responsible in the department to be able to speak to these difficulties, to be able to respond to the difficulties that are peculiar to the Francophone boards. It's 55,000 square kilometers covered by the Francophone board compared to a significantly less amount. So when you have 200,000 in small geographical area and 2,000 more in an area that is more or less the area of Belgium, the country Belgium itself, it's a very difficult situation. It's impossible. Even though we get a little bit higher funding, it's just impossible to respond to the inequities that exist in terms of funding per student. The best solution is, academic, of course, but we can't continue to have these disparities. You mentioned the number of spaces. What recommendation would you make to the federal government to deal with this problem, the number of spaces? Go ahead, Denis. No, I'm part. You are part of the provincial committee, so you're closer to the information than I am. Well, we do work with the provincial government, and a lot of that work is auto-funded by the Canada-Ontario Agreement. We do need some control over how the funding is used. That being said, in Ontario, there was a major study that was carried out about that. There was a strategy that was hammered out with an implementation committee. But no, there were a few results, but the results and the impact was very limited. How to use the funds in terms of their best availability, we could go much farther than that in the analysis. I only have 30 seconds left, and I want to thank you for the management. And when we talk about the minority situation in terms of schooling, can you tell me how this compares to what exists in Quebec, the LSQ? Ms. Anderson, Monsieur Racine, can you give me an evaluation of all the provinces? You talked about gaps that exist with respect to comparing the other provinces to BC. What are those gaps? You can submit that later to the committee. Yes, thank you. We will remind our witnesses about that at the end of the meeting. Mr. Beaulieu, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. The association of la Commission nationale des parents francophones is the same entity that made an analysis earlier on another subject. 47.7% of the funding for a minority language schooling went to Anglophones in Quebec, and there was a shortage for those outside of Quebec. There were more Francophones outside of Quebec than Anglophones in minority situation within Quebec itself. So that analysis dealt with the way in which the funding was allotted and distributed. The teaching in their mother tongue should meet French immersion programs for the majority of students, and that was the thrust of the program. So today, can I ask you, can you look at matters in this light? Do you feel that there has been a balancing with respect to the Anglophones in Quebec, which I feel do not have necessarily the same needs as Francophones outside of Quebec? Unfortunately, we don't have any data. We haven't updated our study either. But we do know that in certain sectors, especially in early childhood education, there is an issue. We need more funding with our partners. And what I find sad is that there's a great deal of concern about French language teaching in a minority situation, but it's not really recognized. They say, oh, yeah, sure, there are courses, but everything's mixed up. Mr. Godin asked a question earlier, the dealing with transparency, and it is very difficult to know where exactly the money is going, where it's going. We need more transparency. We need to be told where it's going. Thank you very much, Mr. Beaulieu. 2 minutes, 30 seconds goes by very quickly. You have the same time, Mr. Julian. When the NDP supported a bill on childcare, Nikki Ashton was assured that there would be space there for minority language childcare, especially Francophone childcare. But the problem has been there was the shortage of early childhood educators who are Francophones, who can teach in French. And here I'm not just talking about childcare. I'm referring to the situation throughout Ontario where you have teachers in Francophone public schools. Is there some place, some role for the federal government to play where people could work on these matters, on these issues of funding? Well, I understand funding, but it's very concerning to hear about the other issues. Is there a role there? Is there a space for the federal government to play a role? Yes, very important. Perhaps the solution for early childhood education is to recruit internationally. An example, 80% of the labor force in that area in Yukon was sourced abroad. And the same thing where did they get these teachers? In France? They got them from Belgium, in French-speaking African countries, Morocco. It's really multicultural. I understand that now there is a need to limit immigration, but there is no restriction for early child. There should be no restriction for early childhood educators who are Francophones. But we are, we have to face the same restrictions on immigration. In Ontario, 55% of the spots are taken. But as I said, the reason why there is this shortfall is the shortage of Francophone instructors. Thank you very much. It's interesting to see the agitation on my part as chair, but two questions very quickly. Mr. Labelle, you talked about the demographic challenges for your French language school boards. Has that changed, been reduced over the past 10 years? Is that because of immigration? Has there been a significant change? Microphone, Mr. Labelle, please. Thank you for your question. It has doubled over the past 20 years in Ontario. That is to say, our school councils, our school boards. We've doubled our intake, and that has been a success. And I forgot the second part of your question. I'm sorry. Thank you. You also spoke about the shortage of teachers, of instructors. Normally, universities, programs are based on the enrollment of students. Is there a demand on the part of students which would allow you to provide more Francophone programs, say for training instructors? If the need grows, will that have an impact? In 30 seconds, please. The department has increased the number of spots available for those who graduate in education. But let me say this. It is very expensive for students to study this type of education and to become a teacher. And they have to choose a specialized area, a trade in the high school where they have to be placed. And when they are placed on a co-op to learn their trade, it's always in an English environment. It's difficult for Francophones. Madame Dukakis, 2 minutes. I don't have a great deal of time, but thank you, Chair. If you could make a recommendation, each of you, one recommendation, what would be the most important recommendation that we absolutely have to include in our study? I'd say you have to have specific clauses where it's really clear that an action plan has a funding but also has to consult with the associations. And you, Ms. Anderson, to be sure that in the action plans that there is a specific funding for continuous stable education for Francophones. Well, the official languages plan, have you been consulted by the different levels of government? Provincial? Yes, provincial and federal. Federal, yes, but it depends from the provinces and the territories. And you, Mr. Labelle, were you consulted? You are on mute, sir. You are still on mute. Madame Girard? Perhaps it's me. Okay, we can hear you now, Mr. Labelle. Is it on the issue of consultation? Yes. It's clear. We have a good relationship with the minister per se. Which minister? The question was provincial or federal? Provincial. But we've gone through 3 ministers in the past 3 months, so we're faced with that. It's very difficult to establish any type of basis with them, but there has to be a clear clauses, an action plan approved by the 2 parties, and to proceed upon that. Well, thank you very much. That completes our testimony for today. What you have said is something that is very important for us. You broke the ice on our very ambitious study, and If you have any information, supplementary information that you would like to submit to the committee, please send it to our clerk. She will be very happy to receive it, as will all members of the committee. Are you clear on what Mr. Serré wanted to have? Mr. Serré asked you to supply some extra information to the committee. Okay, it's clear. I won't get back to it, but I will ask you and then to be freed. You are freed. We will suspend for a few moments. Give you the time.
Yes. I have a motion on the Governor General that I would like to table. You've received it. I won't reread it in its entirety. Essentially, September 25th, the media reported that the Governor General of Canada, Mary Simon, was still unable to converse in French during a visit to a community organization in Lévis, Quebec. And then she had to cancel some of the events planned for her trip to Quebec for this reason. So, of course, we're seriously calling into question Mr. Trudeau's decision to voluntarily appoint this individual. I don't think the federal government actually just appoints people willy-nilly. This was something that was done knowingly. They chose a person who does not speak French, and it's actually calling into question bilingualism itself at the federal level. I'd like to draw your attention to something. Yesterday, Patrick Moreau in Le Devoir wrote something rather interesting. It says that Mary Simon's bilingualism, that's the name of the article, Le bilinguisme de Mary Simon. And in a way, it's in a way instrumentalizing, weaponizing the use of indigenous peoples in this way that, you know, the Governor General does need to speak both languages, but in this way, you're playing down the French language. You're saying that this is just one among many other languages, and it's in keeping with Canadian multiculturalism values. In other words, Quebecers or Acadians do not hold a special place as peoples or nations, but they're just one among many communities or nations. So that is the result of Mr. Trudeau's appointment of Madame Simon. So I think we need to express as a committee the fact that we disagree with this appointment. I think Mr. Gaudin has a few words. Yes, actually, this is a notice of motion we did receive. It's in order. I'm not sure if there are any questions about it. Has everyone seen it? We received it last week, I believe, or 2 weeks ago. Actually, it was 2 weeks ago. So those of you who haven't seen it, September 26th, go take a look. The notice is absolutely in order. Mr. Gaudin, on that motion, on this motion. Mr. Chair, I think the spirit of my colleague's motion is legitimate, but I think he's barking up the wrong tree in the sense that he is not actually turning to the right body. Actually, the person holding the position of Governor General does not need to be targeted by this issue. It's actually a mistake on the part of this current government. I think you need to ask some questions about the appointment process itself. My colleague talks about a will or, doing this willingly or knowingly. I agree with him. There were many people available to hold that position. But imagine the person, this individual who was appointed. Clearly, when you're appointed Governor General of Canada, what are you going to say? You're going to say, yes, thank you so much. I appreciate this appointment, and I commit to learning Canada's second official language, that is French, for the purposes of representation. I think the Governor General is the highest authority in this country, and she has an obligation to speak both official languages. It makes perfect sense that she would have said this, that she would learn the language, that she would commit to learning. It's perfectly legitimate. Now, Mr. Chair, the issue is not this individual, the woman herself, but actually it's the process itself that is faulty, and the many mistakes this government has made since it's been in power. And now I'll break down a few points to just further show the ways in which it doesn't care about French. The Center for Francophone Immigration, we have no idea what happens in terms of expenses, the translation of certain podcasts, positions of Francophone positions in the RCMP, the issues relating to ArriveCAN, strictly English language stickers, and then the Lieutenant Governor General in New Brunswick is a unilingual. She hasn't even committed to learning the second language, which is not even mentioning the member from Prescott Russell Glengarry who used inappropriate words in referring to a witness, and then the Governor General who spoke only one language when she appeared before the House of Commons, and then F-35, absolutely zero mention of official languages when the issue of early childcare was raised. And we at the Conservative Party raised this issue. The Rouleau and Hodge Commission, the official languages commissioner, said it was unacceptable that those documents were not translated. What else? Modernizing the Official Languages Act, C-13. There remain 9 orders that are outstanding. The Royal Assent dates back to June of last year. That clearly this government does not care, and no accountability for the OLSP. And I think this just demonstrates how little effort this government has made in appointing the Governor General, and that is actually a faux pas. You can correct me if now is not the right time, procedurally, to propose an amendment. I thought you were going to put forward your own motion. No, I mean, I'm going to base it on my motion. An amendment is perfectly in order. Mr. Chair, I would move the following amendment. Given that the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has not appointed a bilingual Governor General, and that this individual is still not speaking French, and then you would have the rest of Mr. Beaulieu's motion, and then you have the Governor General said she was deeply committed, etc., and then you say that whereas, so we've all received this on our P9s, right? It is resolved that the Prime Minister given that the Prime Minister has failed to appoint a bilingual Governor General and the latter is still unable to speak French after 3 years in the position, therefore it be resolved that the committee report to the House the Prime Minister of Canada's failure to respect Canada's official languages by appointing a Governor General that cannot speak French and has not demonstrated any improvements over the past 3 years pursuant to the standing order. The committee undertake a study of the reasons which led the Prime Minister to appoint the Governor General unable to express herself in one of 2 official languages, and that as part of this study, the committee invite to appear the Honourable Jean-Yves Duclos, Quebec Lieutenant, the Honourable Pablo Rodriguez, former Quebec Lieutenant, advisory panel on the selection of the next Governor General, the Honourable Dominique Leblanc, co-chair, and Jenny Charette, co-chair. Privy Council Office, Donald McClimney, Assistant Secretary to the Cabinet, Senior Personnel and Public Service Renewal. Just a moment. There is a point of order. Sorry, I'm just calling a point of order because the motion that is being discussed now is actually the same motion that was submitted earlier. Is that in order? It's an amendment, but he's actually including his entire motion within Mr. Beaulieu's motion as an amendment to Mr. Beaulieu's motion. I'm not sure if that's in order. Yes, Mr. Gaudin gave notice of motion, but as he said from the start, he was going to gain inspiration. He's going to base the amendment on his own motion. Is that correct? Absolutely, Mr. Chair. The best way to understand the situation would be to be here in person. That's a low blow. Yeah. Okay. So I'll keep going with this. So then Donald Booth, Canadian Secretary to the King, Office of the Secretary to the Governor General, Ken McKillop, Secretary to the Governor General, that the committee allocate a minimum of 5 meetings to this study and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. There you have it, Mr. Chair. I think we need to be cautious about this and the decisions that were made several years ago, and we need to show some consistency. The Prime Minister and his government need to be accountable through their representatives. How exactly was this appointment process undertaken for this current Governor General? Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll suspend for a moment. I have a question of my clerk.
Monsieur Gaudin. Monsieur Gaudin, nous reprenons. Alors,
Mr. Gaudin, we'll resume. I have to make a determination on this. I get the impression that Mr. Beaulieu's motion is now completely upended because Mr. Beaulieu's motion aimed to express our disappointment, that is, to express our profound disappointment in this appointment for the reasons that you find in the whereas. So here, you're actually going after the very heart of Mr. Beaulieu's motion, and moreover, I might not be using the right terminology here, you're compelling the committee to hold a study that would then include witnesses and include presentation before the House of Commons. Look, of course, you're as an amendment, I think that it is out of order. Go ahead, Mr. Chair. Given due respect, with all due respect, I'll accept your interpretation. I don't share it, but I certainly am willing to accept your interpretation. Let's keep going, but of course you know that I'll be raising my motion when I'll have the opportunity to do so.
La motion de départ de M. Beaulieu. Je sais que vous avez la main levée, M. Beaulieu, mais c'est parce que
Mr. Beaulieu, I know you'd raised your hand, but I think Mr. Dalton also raised his hand. Mr. Beaulieu, is this called a point of order? Can I remove my motion and then I amend Mr. Beaulieu's? No, you can't withdraw your motion unless there is unanimous consent. Is there unanimous consent? I think, in essence, we'll arrive at the same spot. Both of these motions are in order.
Godin amène sa motion, puis à la limite, je peux la réamender si nécessaire.
En fait, alors, si M. Godin décide de déposer sa motion, dont il a donné...
So, these motions are in order. If your motion is out of order, we don't know what's going to happen to yours. You just tabled it. You cannot withdraw it now yourself, but you can ask the committee for unanimous consent to see if you can amend your own motion. I'll call for unanimous consent. The idea was to amend it or to withdraw it. To withdraw it. To then amend Mr. Godin's. That, in my opinion, has a higher likelihood of being passed. I have chairs here, left, right, and everywhere. Go ahead, Mr. Serré. Just a question. If we do provide unanimous consent for Mr. Beaulieu to withdraw his motion, can that same motion be resubmitted later? Or should we just vote on it? I just wanted to know, just for clarification. The answer is yes. He can, because we will not have addressed his motion. It's as though we hadn't heard it this morning. It will be as though we hadn't heard it this afternoon, in essence. Monsieur Beaulieu, I think you're in a point of order. I think I've answered your question. The ball's in your court. So I'm calling for unanimous consent. And let's suspend. Let's suspend to reflect on this. resume. Mr. Beaulieu. No, I had the floor 10 minutes ago. Yeah, that was on Mr. It was a point of order that raised by Mr. Beaulieu. Okay. It's up to you, really. It was a comment on the initial motion. There are several people who actually leapfrogged ahead of me. We understand that the Governor General is Indigenous. It's important. It's important for Canada. But the concern I have as a Métis person, and many other people I think share this concern, there are many other qualified people who are Indigenous who can speak French. So why not respect the fact that we are a bilingual country? Actually, it's truly an insult what happened, what the Prime Minister did. This is not directed toward the Governor General herself as an individual. She's highly respected. I'm going to interrupt you, Mr. Dalton. I'll get back to you. But when we suspended, the issue was whether we would unanimously agree to withdrawing Mr. Beaulieu's motion. Yes, but these are comments I wanted to share earlier. Yes, sure, but Mr. Gaudin's amendment was out of order. Then we were going back to Mr. I understand what you're saying, chronologically speaking, but I would like you to understand what I am proposing here. Mr. Beaulieu had a motion. Mr. Gaudin wanted to amend that motion. Then that was out of order, and I get back to square one, which is Monsieur Beaulieu. Monsieur Beaulieu is asking now for unanimous consent to withdraw his own motion. Is that correct? Microphone, please. We can vote on it, too. Listen, the ball's in your court. Yes, well, let's vote on it. Vote on what? On my motion as it is. You've said no to the amendment. Yet, but before we suspend it, you were wondering if the committee, you asked for the committee to allow you to withdraw your motion if there is unanimous consent. Okay, well then let's clean things up here. Is there unanimous consent? With hands raised, there is unanimous consent for you to withdraw your motion. So that's done. Now, Mr. Dalton, your comment. Monsieur Gaudin, you have the floor. I have another motion to table, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I would now like to table the motion that was tabled October 2nd that reads as follows. I think you may have heard it. Given that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has failed to appoint a bilingual Governor General and that the latter is still unable to speak French after 3 years in the position, therefore be it resolved that the committee report to the House the Prime Minister of Canada's failure to respect Canada's official languages by appointing a Governor General that cannot speak French and has not demonstrated any improvements over the past 3 years. B. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083-F, the committee undertake a study of the reasons which led the Prime Minister to appoint the Governor General unable to express herself in one of Canada's 2 official languages, and that, as part of this study, the committee invite to appear the Honourable Jean-Yves Duclos, Quebec Lieutenant, the Honourable Pablo Rodriguez, former Quebec Lieutenant, the advisory panel on the selection of the next Governor General, the Honourable Dominic Leblanc, co-chair, Janice Charette, co-chair, Privy Council Office representatives Donalyn McClinomany, Assistant Secretary to the Cabinet, Senior Personnel and Public Service Renewal, Donald Booth, Canadian Secretary to the King, and from the Office of the Secretary to the Governor General, Ken McKillop, Secretary to the Governor General, that the committee allocate a minimum of 5 meetings to the study and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. Mr. Chair, I will not be repeating all the mishaps on the part of this government showing a lack of will and desire to protect the French language in Canada. Mr. Chair, one important point.
My motion in no way attacks the person who currently occupies the position of Governor General. To my knowledge, I believe that in the nominating process, in the appointment process, there was another person, because I am very sensitive to what happened. There was a lady, another person, who is today a senator who is appointed to the Senate, probably by way of compensation for not being Governor General. She is Indigenous, she speaks English, and she speaks French. Why was a Governor General who only speaks one of two official languages in Canada appointed? That motion that I have moved and will lead me now to end the discussion that I am having with you to contextualize it. And I have to say that there is respect, indicative of respect that the Conservative Party has for Indigenous peoples. Mr. Beaulieu, I have an amendment now. After, I would create a new point B, which would read as follows. The Official Languages Act. Oh, just let me see here where I am. I'm sorry, I apologize, but I just have to take a minute. If I put another point B, I think the easiest place would be at the very beginning, after the first instance where you talk about a bilingual Governor General who, after 3 years, is still unable to speak French. And I would add that despite the Official Languages Act that ensures the respect for both official languages in Canada and guards the status and privileges of federal institutions, and in Quebec, where can you send this to the clerk? So we can take the time necessary to digest what you've just said.
Et aussi, au passage, juste peut-être souligner au comité.
I would point out to the committee that the Governor General really is bilingual. Inaudible. I just want to point that out. That might be a way to tweak the amendment. Yes. Mr. Beaulieu, if you could please slowly reread your amendment. Despite the Official Languages Act, which is intended to, in quotes, ensure, that's in point A of my original motion, to ensure respect. I'm drawing my inspiration from the original A in my motion. Despite the Official Languages Act, OIA, whose purpose is to ensure respect for English and French as the official languages of Canada, to ensure equality of status and equal rights and privileges as to their use in all federal institutions, close quotes, and according to Section 2A of the OLA, and to advance the existence of a majority French society in Quebec, where the future of French is assured according to Section 2B2 of the OLA. So after 3 years of in this position, comma, that's where you would add your amendment. Yeah, I have it here now. In view of the fact that the Prime Minister of Government chose a bilingual Governor General of Canada who is still unable to converse in French, and there you would add your new amendment, which is despite. And this is in the original A, to ensure the quality of status and equal rights and privileges as to their use in all of federal institutions according to Section 2A, and so on. Is that what you are intending, Mr. Beaulieu? Well, yeah, so A, B, and C would remain. Do you have any questions for Mr. Beaulieu on his amendment? Monsieur Dalton. Any questions? No questions, no comments? Shall we vote on the amendment? We're voting on the amendment, Mr. Beaulieu's amendment. Ms. Koutrakis, can we suspend just until we get a copy of the motion? Yes. We've just got it. We'll make the amendment, and we will send it out in a few moments. We'll just... by Mr. Beaulieu. Do you have any questions? The draft is quite long. Questions, comments? If not, we'll move to the vote. Microphone, please. We don't have any problem with the amendment. We want to know whether or not the amendment is an integral part of the motion moved by Mr. Beaulieu. So we have to do something once an amendment is moved. Is there unanimous consent that the amendment is in order? Is everybody in agreement around the table that Mr. Beaulieu's amendment? Raise your hand on the screen. Everybody's happy, Mr. Boulerice? Oh, I didn't see. Officially, it's Mr. Boulerice. We didn't see you. I'm so sorry. So, Mr. Julien Key who is representing the NDP. No. I'll yield to Mr. Boulerice. He's the vice chair. It's all very pleasant, and we'll see each other a little later. What? Okay, Mr. Boulerice, you're in charge of the hot potato in this matter. Here in person, everybody's in favor of the amendment. So you're in agreement? Unanimously passed. Now, let us come back to the motion as amended. Questions, comments? Go ahead. Chair? The chair. I have already publicly expressed my opinion on this matter. That is to say that I mentioned clearly to the media that the Governor General should be bilingual, should speak both official languages of the country, period. I've always been of that opinion. I am still of this opinion, and I will always be of this opinion. I also said publicly, and I wish to reiterate my comments, that I was disappointed that the Governor General, who had indicated very clearly, as is indicated in the motion, that she would make all efforts possible to acquire French. And today, she is not at the level that she would like to be. I am disappointed, and I want to have her repeat. I want to repeat my comments so that you understand my position. All this to say that it goes against the motion because the motion that we have is a political strategy. The motion we are seized with is a political strategy to waste the committee's time that is so precious. You do know, with all the respect that I have for this Parliament, and it will face October 20th as a deadline, an election deadline. So in between now and that deadline, there's work to be done. This is a study that is an extremely important one. It is historic. I explained, or at least I thought it out in my head, that even though in the Charter of Rights I'm very proud of Section 23, that it was an enormous success of the government of the day, Pierre Trudeau's government, and I would like to recognize the exceptional work done by his minister responsible for that, Jean Chrétien, he was minister at that time, who was the key to Section 23, adding education, the part on education, and he negotiated exceptionally well to convince the provinces and the territories to get on board, to accept it. That was enormously significant. This is not obstruction. No. I'm not. I just want to express my opinion. My Liberal colleagues may want to speak, but I just want, and I am comfortable, I just want to explain my feelings about Section 23 and C13 today have provided exceptional tools to the toolbox for preserving French for the francophonie in Canada. But I don't want to lose a second of the time that we have at hand to do other work. And I don't want to lose the time that we have in the chamber itself to do the work before us. For those two reasons, I will vote against this motion that has been moved by my very dear colleague. Mr. Lightbaum, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to intervene, probably for the first time at this committee. And I'm speaking after Mr. Sanson, so I'm meeting a very high bar here. First of all, it's unthinkable that the Governor General, after 3 years, still doesn't speak French, because that is a position where a Governor General should speak both official languages. I don't know if I've said that publicly. I'm saying it now. I believe this very strongly. As to the function of the Governor General, I don't have the same attachment as do my Conservative colleagues. But I'm more or less of Mr. Beaulieu's school of thought and will vote more or less along those lines. This is not a function that I attach great importance to, but it is symbolic. And as to the substance of the question, a Governor General that does not speak French, well, I think that there is a sentiment that is general, even as expressed by Mr. Sanson. But I will vote against the motion because we've just heard that 20% of people who work in the area of early childhood education in Canada, only 20% have access to care and schooling in French. So the statistics are clear. You know, if you can't preserve the language early in life, it's very difficult to do so later in life. We make a recommendation to a government, and we take a minimum of five meetings to talk about the lack of French acquisition on the part of the Governor General when we have all these other pressing matters ahead. And I think the study on the continuum of education is at least as important, if not more important, the study on Mary Simon. So, gentlemen.
Everyone is voting against it. I think that if you're, or actually everyone's, yes, against the fact that the Governor General doesn't speak French, and actually, I think we should walk the talk if those are the views we hold. This study would allow us to take a look at exactly what led to this decision. There are many examples. You know, the Supreme Court has refused to have some of its own rulings translated into French. There are other issues. There doesn't seem to be any date attached to this particular motion. It's not as though it will be meaning that the study on the continuum would be delayed in any way. Mr. Gaudin, then Mr. Baudouin. Mr. Chair, people across the way are ascribing motives, saying that we want to waste time. Actually, that's not correct. We are here to do our job, and as politicians, of course, we are in politics, and everything we'll be doing as of now will lead to criticism from the Liberal Party, saying that we're trying to waste time and play politics. The they've said that they don't agree. They've all said that they don't agree with the appointment of the Governor General by their own government, by their own Prime Minister. And in that context, it's important for us to do this study. It's important for us to understand what happened and address this so that we have a better plan for the future. We need a vision. My colleague, Mr. Beaulieu, said so clearly. We are not wasting any time on the next study on the continuum that we've actually just begun today. There's actually no date to this motion. So at some point, you have to be consistent. You have to have the right intentions. Of course, I appreciate my colleagues across the way outside of our parliamentary debates, but unfortunately, I think it's unacceptable that this government and its representatives across the way hold these positions. They agree with my motion, but they don't want to walk the talk. They don't want to approve it, support it. Mr. Boulris, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm gobsmacked by the position the Bloc and the Conservatives have. They just are not letting go of this. I feel like they're wasting the committee's time. I just don't agree. The Conservatives are causing the House of Commons to waste a great deal of time. The Parliament's in gridlock because of all these maneuvers on your part, and now because of one person's situation, you want to spend the committee's time on this. I'm not, in favor of the monarchy, but that's a wholly different matter. To spend 5 of the committee's meetings on one person, this makes no sense. We need educational services in French. We need daycare services in French. We need more funding for our communities. We need more resources for the francophonie throughout the country. To think that we should spend the committee's precious time on one individual, I am simply not willing to play this game. I'll let the Bloc and the Conservatives play their petty partisan political games, but I will vote against it. I'd call for the vote, Mr. Chair. I have a busy agenda, and as of 1 p.m., I really needed to leave because I have something else to attend to. You remember last winter what happened? I will adjourn. I won't suspend. I will adjourn. I'll let everyone take some notes. Mr. Sanson is calling for the vote, and when we resume next Thursday, even though we've adjourned, we'll resume exactly where we are at now. Otherwise, things get complicated. I'll adjourn, but everyone knows what I'm doing. Technically, we'll resume Thursday morning as though we had only suspended.